Now let's head on to the next section. In this section is going to talk about poverty line. Like I've told you earlier, it's a kind of a measurement of from a line as to who are the people below that line who are mainly poverty stricken, and the ones above who are the better off sections. That we will be seeing as to how we determine that one line of measurement. Then we see the World Bank, which is the international bank, which has given a certain definition as to who are the countries that are poor and who are the people who are poor. So they have given a standard definition. Then we see the estimates, that is the statistical figures or the facts of poverty in India and across the world. And we further come down to the vulnerable groups that I have explained in the previous section. So like I've told you, the most common method that we can use to measure poverty is through the kind of income a person receives or the kind of the amount of food he consumes. So these two are the only two major methodologies that are used across the world. So there is something like a person is considered poor if whatever income he is getting or whatever he is consuming falls below a minimum level that is required to fulfill their basic needs. So what exactly is basic needs? It is a very important concept that which is different at different times and in different countries, right? So you can understand this concept. Whatever basic need is for you in India is not the same basic need is there for the people in the American countries, right? In the USA. So poverty line will change from place to place, from time to time, from people to people. Whatever I may consider basic necessity for me might not be the same basic necessity for all of you. So it may differ. So each country tends to fix up a line where they can measure poverty, and that line depends on the kind of development they have gone through, whether it is a developing country or whether it's a rich country or whether it's a developed country. So it depends on the country and the kind of people and the kind of a standard of living that these people want to live. Let me give you an example of a car. Okay, having a car in India is a luxury. Not everyone can buy a car, right, in India. But in the USA, when you go, having a car may be not having a car in the US, that person may be considered poor. So that is the kind of difference. So when you come to the Indian scenario and you have to determine the poverty line, there are some factors that need to be accounted for, right? That let us see the different kind of factors that constitute the basic need in India. First being, you have food requirement, which shows the consumption levels. Then you have clothing and footwear, right? Then you have fuel and light. Fuel, yes, definitely for cooking needs. Light, definitely it's a basic need, right? So these are all the basic needs that India accounts for so that they can fix the basic necessities so as to calculate the poverty line as a whole. Then you have educational and medical requirement, but this is not always calculated. It is called calculated for some people only. So the kind of formula that is used in order to estimate the poverty line for food requirement only, that is the first factor, it is desired calorie requirement. How much one person must, the intake of food of one person, right? How many calories that person should consume. So food items will vary, such as cereals, right? You have wheat, jowar, bajra, etc. You have pulses, which are more of protein intakes. And you have vegetables, you have milk, you have oil, you have sugar. So these are the different kinds of food that you have around you, which provide you the basic calorie intake. But you should also understand not everyone can afford these food items, and not everyone have the accessibility to these items. So some people, I can consume a little more of it, and someone else can consume a little less of it, someone else can consume a lot more of it. So it depends again from person to person and the kinds of income that they have, so that they can go out to buy these items. And you should also understand everyone's body is different, everyone's biological composition is very different. Whatever I can consume, my appetite is very different from a person who is around 15 years old or 10 years old, right? Because they have and my metabolism will be different from their metabolism, and also boys and girls have different levels of calorie intake. So all these vary, and depending on all these, are after seeing all these variations, our country will finally estimate poverty. So let us see, after different kind of studies, what is the accepted average calorie requirement in India. So it is 2400 calories per person per day in rural areas, and 2100 calories per person per day in urban areas. So in rural areas, every person in a day must, for a healthy basic living, can consume 2400 calories, and in the urban areas you can consume 2100 calories per day. But you should also remember, for those people who cannot access these food items, which almost constitute to 2400, so they are below the poverty line. So this is exactly how it is estimated at. So this is the line that says food requirement should be at 2400 and 2100. If it goes below that, that means this person is poor, right? And you should also understand, 2004, it is greater in the rural areas than the urban areas, because rural areas, like I mentioned, around 75% of the population there are engaged in agriculture, and agriculture is it's more of a physical job, where we have to go on to the fields and plow and work in the fields, more of field work, right? It's not more of a technical work where you can work at home as well as what is seen in the urban areas mostly. So hence you need more kind of food intake, so you have the energy where you can work in the field. So based on these calculations that we've seen, the poverty line was ultimately fixed. So what exactly the poverty line was fixed at? That is rupees 816 per month for rural areas and rupees 1000 for urban areas. So if it goes below these units, then which means you are below the poverty line or above the poverty line. So you should understand, in this, the price in urban areas is greater than that price of rural areas, despite having less amount of food consumption, is because in the urban areas, the kind of vegetables or cereals or pulses that you buy will be very, very high. It will be higher when you compare it to the ones in the rural areas. You can just see among your friends, to those who come from villages or to those who live in the cities, that you can ask them what is the price of tomatoes in your area, what is the price of onions in your area, and then you can compare. It's always the urban centers, they have higher prices. So when do you think exactly is poverty line fixed? Do you think at once poverty line is fixed and then it's kept for many years together? No. It is periodically. That is, every 5 years they keep revising this kind of rate. That is rupees 816 and rupees 3000. Why do you think they need to change? Yes, they have to change because income levels keep increasing or decreasing of people. And also you cannot say the price of tomato is going to be the same throughout many years. They are going to keep changing because sometimes the farmers can produce a good harvest of tomatoes. Sometimes due to bad rains there is absolutely no tomato at all. So there will be demand and supply gap, that sometimes there'll be, when there is a lot of supply of tomatoes in the market, the price will be normal. When there is less tomatoes, the price automatically will go high, and not everyone can afford that. Hence, after seeing all these kind of different scenarios, it is revised periodically, that is every 5 years. And these are revised by this certain organization called as National Sample Survey Organization. So now that we've seen there's one poverty line and a poverty estimate that has happened in India, right? How can you compare this kind of a poverty line to that in the other countries? It is very hard, right? Because like I've told, one country might be developed and our country is developing. It won't be the same. For us, we may find, bananas very cheap, but the other countries may find bananas very expensive. So that's not, you cannot compare two different countries here. So that is when this international bank called as World Bank has stepped in, and they have started a uniform standard for poverty line. They have defined what is poverty line for all the countries. So that is $1.90 per person per day. Okay. So if a person is suppose earning less than this, they are categorized under poverty. So this is how World Bank is helped for comparison between different countries. So let us head on to this next unit called as poverty estimates. Poverty estimates is going to talk more about the statistical figures, talking about how poverty was around 30 to 40 years ago in India and how has it improved. So I will be briefly reading to you about the different numbers here. So there is a substantial decline in poverty in India from about 45% in the year 93-94 to around 37% in the year 2004-2005. And further, it came down from 37 to around 22% in the year 2011-2012. So some people are, some scientists are predicting that it may go down to less than 20% in the next few years. So please take a look at this graph. So this table tells you the estimates of poverty in India. So you can see in the year the kind of poverty ratio and the number of poor people. And in the year 2011-2012, when the last census was done, you can see the numbers. They have definitely decreased the large amount, which means the government has put its priority in this domain at at poverty, at settling down poverty at very good levels. Next we have vulnerable groups. So who are the people who are under these vulnerable groups? So whoever are the people below the poverty line, it does not apply to all the social groups and economic categories of India. The social groups who are very vulnerable in India are the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes. And among the economic groups who are very vulnerable in India are the rural agricultural labor households, who are usually the ones without any land, and the urban casual labor households. So I will be briefly explaining to you about the graph here. Yeah. So this graph talks to you about the poverty in India in the year 2011-2012, showing you the most vulnerable groups. So this graph is trying to tell you here that anyone who is below the poverty line, everyone is not at the same level, right? Some people are at a lower level and some people are at a higher level. So on the y-axis you have here is the number of poor out of every 100 persons from the category. And then on the x-axis you have the different social groups and economic categories who happen to be more vulnerable than the rest of the BPL category people. So you have scheduled tribes at the highest level, which means that there are 43 people of the scheduled tribes. So there are 43 out of every 100 people who are extremely vulnerable and they belong to scheduled tribes. So that is followed by casual labor farm, the rural and the urban. So scheduled tribes are the most vulnerable when you categorize them into the BPL category. So what have we basically seen from the graph? 43 out of 100 people are belonging to scheduled tribes and they are not able to meet their basic needs because they lie below the poverty line. And 34%, like I've told you, 34% and 34% of casual workers in rural and urban areas are also poor. Ultimately, 29% out of every 100 people belong to scheduled castes and are categorized as poor. So some people who don't have land in India, who belong to the rural labor households, are also categorized under scheduled castes or scheduled tribes. So imagine the kind of burden they have. Imagine the level of poverty they are under, right? So that shows the kind of seriousness this problem even stands in India.